Good morning, guys. Today we're going to be analyzing another article. And remember, this is one of our literacy articles. Therefore, any questions that you have to answer must be in complete sentences with a complete thought. So today I'm going to have you guys annotate first, as we've done in the past, in your interactive notebooks. On page 67, you're going to annotate as I read along the article with you, explaining any vocabulary words you may not understand. If there's words that you don't understand or questions that you have that you need to ask, you'll put those there as well. I should not see anyone with no questions and no vocab words, because I know that we all are learning and therefore no one is perfect. So I should expect to see annotations on page 67 first and foremost. Then you may start your questions, which are complete sentences and proper punctuation afterwards. On page 68, you must have a summary. I usually say if you have overflow to page 68, that's fine, but I should have a 3 to 5 sentence summary at the bottom. Okay, so let's get started. You're going to title your paper Ocean Zones and Marine Food Webs. The shore is where the ocean meets the land. It contains a very important zone known as the intertidal zone. This is a very important zone, intertidal. Notice it has that word tidal, so you can assume or infer rather, that is near the shoreline, right there where the tide breaks at the land. This intertidal zone is very shallow, and light easily reaches the bottom of the ocean. Because the waves constantly move around mud and sand, it is very difficult for plants to grow in this zone. So it's hard for plants to grow, but it's very abundant in sunlight, which should tell you something about the temperature of the water already. And it also should tell you about photosynthesis. However, if plants are hard to grow there, let's keep reading. Also, as the tides rise, high tide, and fall, low tide, this zone is exposed to the air at low tide and submerged underwater during high tide. Okay, so that's saying that anything that lives there must have moments of no water, right? And where there's very little water, and moments where they are completely submerged. So those organisms would have to be able to survive and live in both of those situations, right? In the intertidal zone, the most common organisms are small and most are fairly uncomplicated. Animals that live here include snails, small crabs, clams, and marine worms. This is for a variety of reasons. 1. The supply of water which marine organisms require to survive is intermittent. That word means that some days, like I said, it has, or some moments rather, it has high water content, some very low, or varies at different points of the day. When exposed to the air, organisms like mussels will tightly close their shells to keep from drying out. Clams, too, will likely close their shells and dig down into the wet sand. That's probably so they could stay wet and moist, right? Excuse me. Number 2, the wave action around the shore can wash away or dislodge poorly suited or adapted organisms. Because of the intertidal zone's high exposure to the sun, the temperature range can be extreme from very hot to near freezing in frigid climates with cold seas. Can you guys visualize that for a minute? If it's not that deep and then it's very, very cold, that water is going to be the first to do what? Freeze, right? In the summer, very shallow, it's going to easily heat up very quickly as well. Because of the intertidal zone's high exposure to the sun, the temperature range can be extreme. Oh, I just read that, sorry. From very hot, near freezing, in frigid climates with cold seas. The salinity, remember we said salinity is the salt content or how salty the water is. It's much higher in the intertidal zone because salt water trapped in rocks and pools evaporates, leaving behind salt deposits. These 4 factors make the intertidal zone an extreme environment in which to live. However, that's not to say that it is impossible to survive. Shore birds, such as seagulls and sandpipers, rely on this ecosystem for food. They follow the waves, feeding on organisms that are exposed when a wave moves out. Moving outwards towards the open ocean, we will land on the continental shelf. Y'all know what the continental shelf is? The continental shelf, you've heard of that before. That's right here. If you don't know where that's at, that's the continental shelf. And then this is the continental slope where it drops down and starts getting deeper. Okay? Let me find my place again. I lost it. Okay. This area is permanently covered with generally well-oxygenated water. It receives plenty of sunlight and has low pressure, lots of sunlight. It has relatively stable temperature, pressure, light, and salinity levels, making it suitable for photosynthetic life. Okay, so let's analyze that just a little bit. I told you that one of your learning goals is that you have to be able to tell me about how much sunlight, about the temperature changes, about the pressure in every zone of the ocean, along with the organisms that live in each one. Now, here's where we start that. And so anything that lives in that intertidal zone must be able to withstand, sometimes when there's high tide, sometimes when there's less water or low tide, must be able to withstand the changes in temperature, because sometimes it is very hot because it gets lots of sunlight. Is very low pressure, so organisms are not, going to have to worry about too much pressure there. So it's relatively stable environment, stable temperature. The levels make it suitable for photosynthetic life. Photosynthetic, we're talking about those plants that have to photosynthesize. That's all that means, okay? Now, the second zone that you need to learn is the open ocean or the pelagic zone. Make sure that you put these two together so that you know they're interchangeable, because I promise you on the EOG, they will try to trick you with using either or, okay? So the open ocean or the pelagic zone is the big, wide open area filled with a variety of organisms. Think of the Little Mermaid or Finding Nemo. The pelagic zone can be broken into different light zones. The photic zone, remember I told you yesterday the photic means that has some light, right? The twilight zone and the aphotic zone. In the photic zone, sunlight can reach up to 200 meters below the surface. This allows this area to be warmed by the sun, and the temperatures range from about 104 to 27 degrees Fahrenheit. And supports a very large population of producers. Those are plants, right? Producers are plants, such as phytoplankton that we talked about yesterday and zooplankton. These two producers are absolutely essential marine food webs. Now, marine, we said, is referring to salt water, right? Removing the phytoplankton or the zooplankton, removing them, means possibly wiping out the rest of the organisms in the food web, because a lot of organisms in the food web feed on those. In the twilight zone, sunlight is not as strong, so the water is cooler, about 41 to 39 degrees Fahrenheit, and the pressure downward, that's the downward pushing force, is greater. Organisms living here include whales, jellyfish, and squid. These organisms feed on nutrients that drift down from above. The larger organisms, like whales, can dive down deeper to feed on animals in the deeper dark part of the ocean. As we descend deeper into the ocean, we reach the deep ocean or the aphotic zone. To descend means to go downward, right? So as we descend deeper into the ocean, we reach the deep ocean or aphotic zone. Again, I want you to write both of these words and make sure that you know them, because they are interchangeable as well. This zone is thousands of meters below the surface, and there is no light here. No light means no photosynthesis. The pressure is very great, and the water temperature is very cold, somewhere between 43 to 32 degrees Fahrenheit. In this zone, hydrothermal vents in the ocean floor can release heat from inside of the earth, which can create small areas of warmth. Hydrothermal vents are very, very important. So if you don't know that word, you need to make sure you write that on your annotations on page 67. Hydrothermal. Hydro meaning water, thermal meaning heat. These are literally areas from cracks in the bottom of the ocean floor where volcanic material often is seeping that heat from the cracks of the earth. So that is where some organisms congregate, or they get next to, so that they stay warm. Okay. Now, it's not going to be enough for every organism in the bottom of the ocean. Clearly, there's going to be organisms that like the darkness, that like the cool temperatures, and those are extreme conditions. And you're going to learn about those a little as we go on this weekend. That ecosystems generally form around these areas, as mentioned before. Photosynthesis is not possible because there is no light. Instead, organisms use energy stored in chemical bonds in a process called chemosynthesis. Okay, this is a word that you might not have seen before. So, chemo means chemical. Synthesis means to synthesize. So chemosynthesis. So we're synthesizing or using chemicals to make food. So they can't go through the process of photosynthesis, but they can chemosynthesize, okay? So what does that mean? Write that word down. Microorganisms that do chemosynthesis provide energy from giant tube worms, clams, and other life forms like anglerfish. Anybody heard of an anglerfish? Do y'all know what that is? Have you ever seen the picture of the fish that has the light on his head? He looks like he's got a flashlight on his head. That's called an anglerfish. And he very much does live in the ocean, or the deep ocean, or the aphotic zone. And he is adapted to that, and he can see because he has a light on his head. All right. So right here in the picture, you can see a hydrothermal vent that is surrounded by giant tube worms, because they like that, right? There's the heat. Now, let's talk for a minute about marine food webs. And yes, you will have to do the questions here and leave the blank, write the whole thing, and fill in the blank based on what you have learned, okay? I want to show you this, and I do have an anchor chart that I will hang up in the room that is exactly this, as I have made sure that I had to include this. Remember, I said when we were talking about food webs that I would come back to this. Now I'm coming back to this, because here's your phytoplankton and your zooplankton. And remember, I said these are major sources of food in our marine food web. And so now this is what we're talking about. If the cod eats phytoplankton, and all of a sudden you take away the phytoplankton, and the krill eat phytoplankton, so the krill and the cod may disappear, right? Those organisms that are used to eating the zooplankton, the cod eats zooplankton, so do the squid, they may go extinct or have to die out, right? If they can't compete for other organisms. Now, so let's continue. Marine food webs. Producers in marine or ocean environments are important to all life on Earth. The main producers in the ocean are algae and other microscopic organisms called phytoplankton. These producers live in the upper region of the ocean. Why the upper region, you think? Because they photosynthesize, right? There they may receive enough light to perform photosynthesis. In the ocean, as on land, energy flows directly or indirectly from producers to consumers. The food web below shows the role of producers in a marine ecosystem. Recall that when producers perform photosynthesis, they release oxygen. That's very important. Dissolved oxygen into the water. Cold water holds more dissolved oxygen. Much of the oxygen that algae and phytoplankton produce is used by marine organisms. Some of it enters Earth's atmosphere, where it is then used by the organisms on land, so it recycles back into the atmosphere. Of 10, many food webs in marine ecosystems are dependent on plankton such as phytoplankton and zooplankton. Without these producers, many, if not all, of the other organisms in the ocean would be wiped out. So, that is your article in a nutshell. I do believe you have some more questions. I may have to go take a look, but make sure you fill in the blank with increase or decrease here. Fill in the blank, and I want you to summarize the article. If after that you have not completed some of the work that you owe me already and you're behind, you may go ahead and work on that. Vocabulary, if you have not done that. I will also have an Ed puzzle for you to complete today, so please make sure that you get that done. All right.